Hello, everyone. It's very rare an event, especially a MEF event, that I'm not moderating a session, that I actually get to speak. And this is one of those rare occasions. I think in the past 3 years, I can count them on probably just 2 or 3 fingers. So to take the heavy load, the heavy moderation duty load, is Mr. Tim Ward, who is VP of Number Information Services with XConnect. Tim, hi.
Well, good morning, and it is a slightly scary concept, actually, James. I mean, you are the master of ceremonies in every possible way. So
I don't know about that, Tim, but first of all, I'd like to thank XConnect for sponsoring this session. Without our members sponsoring sessions, we wouldn't be able to make events such as these available to everyone around the world for free. So first of all, thank you to XConnect. I'm going to step back now and just take on my role as a speaker, and I'll just hand over to you, Tim, to introduce yourself, XConnect, and the other speakers.
Sure. Well, the normal response when somebody introduces you is to say something like, "It's a pleasure," and that's exactly what it should be. But it's kind of a slightly strange subject that we're going into, and it's almost a little bit sad that so early on in the agenda we kind of start off talking about problems rather than opportunity. It's kind of the wrong way round. However, you know, when you think both sessions this morning so far have actually mentioned sort of artificial traffic inflation and some of these problems of fraud, it's on our industry's mind. There's no doubt about it. It's kind of number one on the MEF's recent survey. You know, we're now seeing sort of the FCC, the US regulatory body, actually taking a real interest now in what's going on with text. And, you know, they've moved their attention from kind of robocalling to robo-texting, which is slightly out of their usual realm. And I think that is really showing the level of attention that this kind of subject is getting. So, you know, you look at all of those things. You know, James mentioned Amex kind of right at the beginning of the last session as an example of someone who's kind of, are they turning away from it? Well, they're kind of certainly taking a little bit of a turn there. But I think, you know, this really got to the forefront of everybody's attention when the very public statements came out. Well, I think it was November last year when I described him yesterday as young Mr. Musk. I think that might be possibly the wrong way of putting it. But anyway, as the takeover of Twitter went through, all of a sudden, with pretty much no warning whatsoever, SMS 2FA got turned off. It wasn't even really announced. It just happened. And I think that caused a little bit of a shockwave to go through the industry. You know, as I think he's looked at his business further, and he said, okay, it's costing him $60 million a year. And then I think February this year turned around and told everybody, I'm going to be charging you now. You want to use sort of further authentication methods or SMS-based authentication, then you're going to have a paid for account. So, you know, this is a much broader issue. But I've got to say, it ain't new. This is not new in any way, manner or form. We've been dealing with sort of artificial traffic right from the very, very early usage of SMS. You know, the one that was thrown at me, I think a couple of weeks ago was, well, you remember the US teen idol? I mean, effectively, it was a massive case of, well, it was really voting fraud that was kind of taking place by pumping. And I think it was being referred to as pumping. So we end up with all of these words associated with artificial traffic inflation. I do kind of have to think a little about the English language here. But it's kind of interesting when you look at the sort of title that we've chosen for this session, when you kind of go, okay, so the session title, Generation, Trashing and Inflation, comma, meet A2P messaging. Now, it depends whether you take that comma out as to kind of what that sentence means. That comma at the end is very interesting. It's kind of, if you're doing A2P messaging, you've got to expect certain types of fraud, is one way of looking at it. Or you could do it the other way around and kind of think, well, you know, these generation trashing and inflation, they are meeting A2P messaging. But I think however you look at it, however you sort of interpret that wonderful piece of English language and the dreadful things we do with punctuation, the bottom line is the same thing. It's a reality. It's a fact of life. So here we are. We've got a session following on from this where, again, James and Sam Barker are going to be looking into some of the kind of direct impacts on the ecosystem. But before doing that, it kind of makes really good sense to get a view of what is really being affected, how it's really impacting us, kind of the view from the, well, it's kind of like the cold face, what is really going on. So, I think we've got, I have to be careful how I count this. In addition to James, we also have Jason Lunn from Cisco, a CPaaS provider. We've got Simon Coney from AdaptiveMobile as a sort of security solutions provider, and James, who obviously has that superb kind of top-down view, getting involved in so many of these different sessions within the MEF and the industry bodies, and having a very kind of open discussion with the members of this ecosystem. He's in a almost unique position to be able to provide some input, which is kind of why when we were talking about doing this session, we thought, okay, let's turn it around, give James the opportunity to really provide his input, because I think it's of such great value. And I should mention ourselves as well. James kind of gave us a little mini introduction earlier, but we're an information provider, and the information that we provide about telephone numbers is being used very broadly to address this challenge of how to identify certain types of fraudulent traffic, in particular, sort of the artificial inflation that we're seeing across the board. But probably the first thing to do, though, is kind of get a question to the panel and use this question also to give each of them an opportunity to introduce themselves and their companies and kind of expand a little more on what I was talking about here. Jason, I wonder if you could kind of kick off and kind of answer the question: is this just kind of the issue of the day, almost like a flash in the pan, an instant, just something we should be a bit worried about? But is this something really that we've got to be dealing with, worrying about? Is this just a publicity thing, or is there real substance that we've got to change the way we do business? So let me ask you that as that first question.
Thank you, Tim. Great to be on here today. I think firstly, introduction from myself. So I sit in Cisco. I think everyone's probably heard of Cisco within our CPaaS connectivity team. But I also have a MEF board hat as well, like Tim. So we sit on the MEF board, making sure that we're heading in the right direction for value for all of the members. And help protect our industry long term. That's what MEF is all about. When it comes to AIT, I think for me, unfortunately, there are some parties out there who don't want to play by the rules. I guess the best way to put it, and let's call them bad actors for now, not fraudsters, just bad actors. And I make that differentiation because those bad actors really are, so we say, stretching the rules sometimes for their own financial gain, believing it's the right thing to do for them personally, but it isn't the right thing for longevity of the industry in terms of my definition. And so, those bad actors are kind of like whack-a-mole, so you can find them and you can keep whacking them down, but always another technique, always another a route to market. And so, when we identify them, we need to put those prevention measures in to minimize that. And for AIT, I think, for me, there is a part to play by everyone, not just us in terms of telecoms, in terms of aggregators and service providers and operators. It's actually the enterprises have a part to play here as well. This is what we had with the sender ID registry, in the UK. This isn't just one player. This is lots of parties across that whole ecosystem that have to work together. And if you don't work together, you won't get the right outcome. For us, We've used the process in the UK of using action fraud reports for our customers. So if we spot something with our customers, we'd report it to them. We'd help educate them because they wouldn't understand. They'd raise a police report called the action fraud report in the UK, which means basically a police report to say something bad's happened. We'd then process that downstream through the mobile operators and basically stop the money flow. And that has been successful on a number of occasions where we have stopped the money getting to the bad actor and then give that back to the customer, which is brilliant. And we need to, from my position, we need to do more of that because that makes a real impression on the bad actors that you're not going to make money here. This is a negative position for you. Just go somewhere else or just stop doing whatever you're doing. It would be preferable. I think it is there today. It is going to carry happen, but has it reduced significantly from these kind of education and fraud prevention methods? Yes, it has in the UK market for sure. In other markets, it's on a different trajectory. Everywhere's slightly different, but for me, it's one of those things that's there today. It'll always exist, and we'll have to stay on top of it.
Yeah. Thanks. And I'm sure everybody thinks that these things are just completely randomly did. We did actually prepare for this. And then, of course, I chose to do things in a different order from what I've actually told everybody. So my apologies. Let me try and return to the order I should have been in, which is actually to get back to James and kind of ask that little question about, the work that the MEF has been doing here. I have got some slides presenting them as an interesting challenge using this particular platform, but let's see if I can actually work out how to do it.
You can do it, Tim. Come on.
I'm sure I can work it out. And I think, obviously I think all of us on this call have actually been involved in some of the work on the fraud framework. That is something which I think gave a very good basis for understanding and categorizing these types of fraud. So, James, that's kind of what I'd like to ask you a bit about, and that kind of aspect of just educating the marketplace, because I think James has kind of almost, which is why I say I did it slightly in the wrong order. Then James has sort of Jason has given us a couple of examples of how that has already had a direct impact, but let me just allow you to kind of go through some of that original work maybe.
Thank you. So if we unpack this, and again assuming nothing, so anybody watching this, hearing this topic for the first time can understand as well. So MEF, we are member led, so the members do the work and myself and my colleagues help direct and control, but members choose the topics and members do the work. We have Jason here, who is a board member of MEF. We have Tim here, who is a board member of MEF. And Jason was one of the people to initially put together the Business SMS Code of Conduct, which is the most detailed Business SMS Code of Conduct there is around and about. 50 companies have signed up to that. But also associated with that is what Tim mentioned, the fraud framework. That's a lovely educational document which has information about the 14 different known fraud types, and MEF Backstage team, if you can get the link to that and drop it in here, that would be absolutely fantastic at some point. Thank you very much. And I strongly recommend all of you who are coming across the world of SMS do actually have a look at it. And here is one of those slides from that fraud framework. So mapping the 14 known types of fraud. Thank you very much, Tim. Now, I've been in the world of business SMS for a long time. And unfortunately, what we've seen, and this is why the artificial inflation of traffic is so painful artificial inflation generation, or some people call it generation of traffic, pumping, as you called it, Tim, as well, different terminology for ultimately the same thing. Unfortunately, enterprises are ultimately in the crosshairs here and are left nursing the headache of huge unexpected bills. And that is different, perhaps, from most other types of fraud. And we've been hearing from MEF members all over. I was on a lovely panel with Uku Tomikas, the CEO of Macente, and we heard from him about one of his enterprise clients who was very, very badly impacted by this as well. It's a different ballgame. Now, if you look at other channels, such as voice, there are established protocols and procedures for enterprises that have fallen victim, for example, to international traffic revenue share fraud, ITRF, in the world of voice. And that's where the enterprise can go to the police, essentially get a crime reference number, and it's tracked back. And the enterprise, it's difficult to come through it, but they can get through it. This is a different ballgame with SMS. And not only do you have this artificial inflation generation of traffic, you also have it combined with something called message trashing. So the two, AIT plus message trashing, where essentially, let's say I'm an aggregator, I've got these two messages to deliver for the enterprise client. I go, forget it, I'm only going to try delivering one, but I charge for two. So I've trashed 50% of the messages. That combined with artificial inflation is a messaging smart bomb. And unfortunately, that's what we have going off around the place. So the fraud framework is just an educational bit. The business SMS code of conduct, and I'm pleased to say all three companies represented on here. So we've got Simeon here from ENEA AdaptiveMobile Security, Tim from XConnect, and Jason from Cisco Mobile. All three companies have signed up to the code of conduct. And what the code says is that we as a company are doing everything we can to protect SMS, business SMS, A2P SMS as a channel. It does not state anywhere in it that we will guarantee 100% we will never deliver spam or fraudulent traffic. I'm sorry, it doesn't matter how good you think you are or who you are. No company, including the ones on here, can guarantee that that will be the case, because there are 2 trillion transactions a year. That number of transactions in general in the world of business messaging is increasing. Unfortunately, because of the increases in fraud, the commercial model pressures on A2P SMS growth is plateauing, and in the next year or two will actually start to, the volumes will start to decrease. If you look at Mobile Squared, if you talk to as well, I'm sure, to Juniper Research, we've got Juniper coming up next. As Tim mentioned, I'm going to be talking to Sam Barker, and indeed Juniper are opening up the day tomorrow, so it's going to be interesting to see their take on the situation as well. So hopefully that's answered your question, Tim, but the educational aspect, the code of conduct aspect is important. Just trying to do the right thing and collaborating using neutral platforms like MEF, like i3 Forum, the GSMA, the ITW, GLF, so many other organizations, and we as organizations work together as well. I mentioned right at the start of the event, we have a fantastic session coming up with the leaders of 5 trade associations on one panel. And that's what we all have got to do. All 200 companies as part of MEF have got to pull together. The trade associations have got to pull together, and ultimately governments and regulators too.
So just very quickly, sorry, I just interrupt there, James. James, I'd also say actually, like the NCSC guidance on messaging as well. They're doing some hard work. I know they're going through a review at the moment, so they'll have an update, I believe, in a month's time that'll include AIT there as well. Again, it's about education, about trying to make sure that each of those businesses understand what's going on here and what they can do to protect themselves.
Exactly.
So that obviously provides a kind of great background in saying the education, classification, allowing people to understand what it is that they're actually trying to deal with. Some of the actions that we've already taken to address that, and I think we're going to come back to that a little bit later as well. But I think I'd like to now bring Simeon in to talk specifically about almost some of the technical measures which we're seeing, and kind of what they're seeing in terms of the solutions demand from an implementation point of view actually coming out of this marketplace. So Simeon, please introduce yourself and the company, and then if you can carry on into the what are the sort of things you're seeing as demands from the marketplace driving the solutions.
Thanks, Tim. So, well, to introduce ourselves, at ENEA AdaptiveMobile, we have effectively traffic control solutions, typically taken from initially a security perspective, but when you're managing traffic, we see all traffic. So we've actually been having eyes on to AIT as a traffic problem for about the last, I would say, sort of 3 to 4 years under various guises. And I think really one of the key characteristics is to be able to address a problem, you have to understand a problem. And to understand a problem, you've got to be able to define what that problem is. So in fact, we've been hearing that there are 14 different families of fraud. And Tim, I mean, you've made comment that there's a number of different words used to describe AIT. But we've actually been working on a taxonomy definition for AIT. And in fact, we've now discovered that there are 7 quite distinct types of AIT affecting who is doing it, why they are doing it, and how they are doing it. And of course, the consequences of who is affected in that. And it's interesting how wide the challenge of AIT has actually spread. I mean, it overlaps some existing areas, and we've seen some very creative new techniques coming into new areas. And it's not just about a pure financial angle as well. Sometimes it's reputational, sometimes it creates bias. So we're seeing now all of these different techniques, and Jason, as you've mentioned, you know, it's all about the money, and people change. I mean, absolutely, like any other aspect of fraud, when bad actors get prevented in making money, they are the first to try and evolve and mutate and change their techniques to try and get around that, to maintain effectively almost a business commitment position that they've made. You know, that's why they're doing this. So really, Tim, to answer your question on sort of who do we see being interested in this, I mean, it's now spanning the full messaging ecosystem. I mean, certainly we've heard from Jason, and, you know, James, you've also mentioned other case studies where the enterprises are being affected. I mean, just to put numbers on it, I mean, on average, I would say probably about 400,000 messages a day for a large brand, easily 10 to 100,000 messages for a tiny brand. You know, there's almost no discrimination. If people are found to have weaknesses in their infrastructure, they are used. They don't care whether it's a 4-person band in a garage compared to a 100,000 employee. They will utilize their capability to send messages anywhere in the world for abuse, for fraud, for business gain. And then what's also interesting is how this has spanned all the way through the ecosystem. So we're seeing actions that are targeting particularly the onboarding, the CPaaS. We're seeing those that target the inter-exchange carriers and the aggregators in the middle. And then we're also seeing a lot of activity on the terminating aggregator side as well. So thus requiring mobile operators to require protection. So in terms of an area of interest, we're seeing it right across that message delivery ecosystem that are being affected by AIT and need solutions.
I think that well, there's been a very common theme across here, which I think really is pulling out. This is across an ecosystem. This is an unusual world. And the next visitor, the next speaker we shall have.
Victor the Meth Cat. Plenty to say about the topic.
James and I share the same problem, that our cats both feel that they need to participate in these meetings. I don't know what it is, but anyway. So, sorry, just to get back. So the ecosystem seems to be kind of the challenge of this environment. I think, you know, James mentioned a whole series of different organizations that are really trying to address this. And obviously, you know, Jason was looking at it very much in terms of how a kind of CPaaS provider and a kind of the next generation A2P player is working that with their customers. You know, I kind of find this very interesting. Okay, this session is supposed to be about wholesale, the aspect of wholesale. That's generally kind of looking at what's going on in, should I say, the middle of the ecosystem. It's kind of that piece. It's certainly not right down at the edge at the subscriber level, and it's certainly not down at the applications level. And it does seem that a lot of the classification that we have to deal with here is who in that ecosystem is actually being burned, who is paying, who is really feeling the pain. Now, you know, we can come back to that in terms of the bigger picture, and I think everybody's feeling a certain pain from this, because there's a loss of trust in this particular space. But kind of turning that straight back in that, you know, the people who we are normally seeing even though we're looking at the factors that can be applied at each step along the ecosystem are the enterprise. It seems very generally it's the enterprise who end up paying. The money tends to come from them, and it flows through the ecosystem in the same direction as the actual traffic flows as well, all the way back to the end user subscriber, the person who's actually receiving a message. So I think, some of these classifications, some of these recognitions, I think also some of these actions which can be taken, when you just look within the wholesale world, make sure you don't pay the bad guys. It's kind of one very straightforward action, which I think we've all talked about. Okay, that's kind of works. That disrupts. It doesn't necessarily stop, but it disrupts the process, and I think that seems to be kind of a bit of a key position to think about. I think one thing that might be interesting, I think Simeon mentioned some of the stats of what we're seeing here. I can give you there's certainly a view that we get in this. Let's see if I can do my presentation again, which is a very interesting challenge here. Right, let's hit that button, that one, and I think, of course, the window I want to share has disappeared. Let's see if I can do it from there. Has that gone full screen to a...
It has. We can see it. Pre-transaction validation failures.
Excellent. Thank you. It's fascinating trying to work out what's being shown and what isn't. This is actually a sample. I have shown this before, but I find it so kind of illustrative of kind of what's going on and some of the things that you can see from this traffic inflation. First of all, this is quite a decent sample. This is a relatively large enterprise, a large brand. So they're looking at kind of over 100 million messages a month. So this is not a kind of little small organization. What that does mean is that they're very heavily targeted by the bad guys. And, what we were seeing was that about 15% of the requests for 2FA or the requests for callbacks were actually being addressed to totally invalid, non-existent phone numbers. So, it was a great example of how a really, really simple piece, there's no real intelligence here. This is just a basic, does the number exist? Yes or no. But it's surprising how difficult it is for a brand to actually know that. It also picked out, certain countries were heavyweight destinations. Some of them were kind of crazy. How could Monaco possibly be generating over 1 million callbacks in a month, or 2FAs within a month? Something was strange there. The UK you could kind of understand, but even then you're looking at about 5 million on quite a regular basis of requests going back to the UK. And then you get some strange ones like Jordan. I think, there's other pieces that we can see in here, and this is where I think, some of the analytics type companies really can come to play. You're seeing about 4 months worth of Jordan, then it just disappears. Monaco, a couple of months, then it just disappears. I think there's also a good piece of news in here in that the overall volume of the bad traffic actually has reduced over a period of time. You're looking at about a year's worth of samples here, and you can actually see that it went from kind of 15 million bad transactions. By the way, I think putting some money on that, 15 million messages, even if they're being sent at a couple of cents each, you can do the maths. If they happen to be going to premium rate numbers or some sort of high rate revenue share number, then that might be more in the dollars as opposed to the cents. So the kind of values that people are being hit with here are definitely significant. But I kind of find it very, very interesting that you can address it. It can be, you can break the back of it. You can certainly have an impact on it. But you kind of look back down here. You've got March earlier this year where all of a sudden there was another peak. So people come back and try again. So it's very interesting kind of characteristics that can be seen in this traffic. Let me see if I can get back to the other screen now.
Tim, we have a question as well.
We do, and I felt now would actually be an ideal time to kind of get into that question. And my apologies if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, but Mega Gale, does that sound about right? Let's hope that's right. The point that has been made here, that there are organizations who are effectively advertising, generating of margins, generating of revenue. This actually came up in the middle of a call yesterday, where I was suddenly sent a LinkedIn notification, which was for about 100 major brands that could be targeted, and that a company would help you target those particular brands, and they would generate traffic for whatever purposes you want, whether to get sign-ons or to generate revenue or whatever you wanted to do. So it'd be really good to understand, from each person's point of view on this panel. Is there a way to really address? I mean, I find it incredible. It can be so blatant. Out it goes on LinkedIn, something which I think our whole industry recognizes as heavily fraudulent. What can we do to kind of address that kind of problem? I think maybe Jason, I'll ask you to kind of kick off the response on that one.
Yeah, thank you. I agree. It was somewhat brazen, that message this week. That's probably the worst one I've seen recently. There have been lots of others who are trying to do it underhand, shall we say. You remember the old way of buy a Rolex watch inside a jacket, This is just going a whole step further. This is like creating a shop next door to a jeweler's and selling Rolexes, basically, that are fake. It's going that extreme, which is a very bad place to be. If you do your research on that company, they're not easy to find. You won't find the history and all the other legitimate checks and balances you should do on organizations before you work with them. But that aside, all we can do is help educate businesses and ourselves not to trust these kinds of organizations. I think one of the excuses I hear a lot from the industry is we're being pushed by an enterprise to give a rate that is below cost price, and so we need to hit that target. It's like, no, you don't. If the enterprise is pushing for a rate, the cost price is here, and the organization wants this rate, you have to say no. And we do that regularly, and just say, no, we're not doing that. We're not going to lose money. We have to, make money to make ourselves profitable, to make sure we can continue to be here next year, the year after, for longevity, and to help protect all of our businesses. And so going under cost price is not achievable, and these kind of techniques are one of the ways that occurs. Like, as you said, James, 2 bits of paper to drop one, crashing. There's lots of methods. I think we have to continue that education to make sure that these organizations aren't successful. I think it was good that message made it around this week. Whether we do that more or not, I'm not sure yet. I think we have to be very careful, especially trade associations like MEF, because it has to sit independently. So it can't have a direct negative impact on somebody. It has to do something that's fair and responsible to everyone, and make a decision on whether that's good or bad. It isn't necessarily MEF's choice. That's down to its members documenting what is fair and reasonable and going from there. So yeah, I think it is very hard. I think for some organizations that may be easier to say that these are bad parties and these are good ones, but generally, the position is, you say, these are the good ones. These are the knights in shining armor. These are the people who are doing the right thing. And you don't talk about those who aren't doing the wrong thing, because that can come back to haunt you, is my general opinion. I don't know what your position is on that. I guess, James, to extend that from a MEF position.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to James, because I think it'd be great to hear from Simeon, because I think you've got some very practical experience with these problems.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, I think one of the really interesting things is, I mean, Tim, as you've shown, and as I think many of us have put up other slides, these things are first quantifiable. It can boil down to specifically how much and where and what volume, and by how much I mean financial impact. But the other characteristic, let's not forget, I mean, the very nature of our industry is there is attribution. We do get to know where things have come from. We do get to know at least who is some level of identity in that previous connection. So, whether it's somebody pretending to be a particular business or impersonation, or whether it is actually traffic being carried in aggregation from other sources, there is always a level of identifier that can be used. So I think, one of the questions to Mega's point there is that, is there a way to expose and stop these? I think, the first aspect of exposing is being able to measure, being able to report. And then the third aspect is then being able to share those reports. It's one thing to have that information inside your business and use it to make your own business decisions. But how do we keep the community safe and protected? And I think, Jason, this very much comes to your point, which is, it's great to talk about how folks are signed up to charters. The sensitivities about reporting abuse is another aspect. But as an industry, we do have precedents in things like the GSMA fraud forums with their fraud abuse reports. So I think that is a role, and James, I'm going to look at you here with the MEF badge on, but potentially that MEF could look at maybe how are fraud reports collated, how are they shared, how are they relatively sized and assessed and exchanged. But I think that type of information sharing could be one of the techniques used to help address those, using intelligence sources from XConnect, using firewalls, using various research and analysis mechanisms. But it's that sharing of information really then becomes the key, I think, to be able to actually root cause long-term address this issue.
Simeon, I couldn't agree with you more. And if I could click my fingers right now, there would be an amazing database which any MEF member who, again, this is under discussion by MEF members. Some members are saying, look, the only members who should have access to this are member companies that have signed the Business SMS Code of Conduct. So there's a lot of things that need to be ironed out. But in an ideal world, it would be fantastic to have a live database there available for querying, where you could get a number range, and you could just line it up and see, is it safe? Isn't it safe? Have there been issues with it? Whatever it might be as well. 100%. Now, the collaboration, I've got 2 or 3 points to make. My first point is the value of an SMS. Certain parties in the business SMS industry have done SMS channel a huge disservice by devaluing it, and with this race to the bottom when it comes to SMS commercial models and pricing. If you step back and look at some of the fantastic use cases where SMS has filled a void, or simply SMS is used to save so much money, let's look at the world of credit cards, debit cards, one-time passwords. All 4 of us sit in the UK. We're of a certain age. We will have been very used to, for so many years, receiving our debit credit cards in the post in one communication, and receiving a separate communication, a separate letter with a window which we open up or have got to scratch out with a PIN and a password. Now just think how much that would have cost, or how much that does cost, the financial services provider, the bank, the credit card company. You're probably looking at, whether it's dollars, euros, pounds, you're probably looking at 2, something like that, to do that. In steps SMS, and you could be charged, it could be 4 pence, 5 pence, 6 pence, let's say 1/40th, 1/50th of the cost of the previous thing. You are saving stacks of cash. It's being done practically in real time. It's amazing. It's brought things so much further forward. So why have certain parts of this industry been hell-bent practically on reducing the price of SMS and not really reflecting its value? That's the first thing. So secondly, when it comes to the anti-fraud and protection perspective, obviously the sharing side of things is truly important. But then the thing is, when you have neutral organizations such as MEF, we are neutral as an organization. We've got to remain neutral. It's not up to MEF to decide to say, you're good, you're bad, you're somewhere in between. It's up to ultimately the members to proactively get involved. And what we actually haven't mentioned here, and no one has mentioned yet, is the R word, and that's regulation. So if you look around the world, you look at India with the largest practical usage of blockchain, fighting the world of SMS spam out there. You can imagine a country now with 1.5 billion, approaching 1.5 billion people. The number of transactions there is frankly mind-boggling, whether it be SMS or WhatsApp business messaging, or of course now RCS business messaging has been relaunched. Literally hundreds of millions each day of transactions. It's vast, absolutely vast. So controlling, getting a handle on that is super difficult, but surely regulators have a role and responsibility. But ultimately, and this is what we see within MEF, there is a general consensus amongst members that the ideal is to have light touch regulation from the official regulator, but the industry itself to employ self-regulation in the form of things such as the Business SMS Code of Conduct within MEF. So we have to have a multi-prong approach. None of us, whether we're trade associations or individual company members here, can work in isolation, and it isn't easy, but we've got to make a concerted effort. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, there are so many regulators and governments out there that do not understand, for example, just the difference between a P2P SMS and an A2P SMS. I've seen it with my own eyes in the past few months. So we're clearly not doing a great job in the industry. We've got far more to do.
So I think, James, you're making a great point there, that it's not just about educating the ecosystem. Obviously, we have a business responsibility to deal with it, but it's the rest of the world as well. And the regulators have got to be a real focus for us to really communicate with and kind of bring into this game. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so really quick answers, but I almost want to take it back to the very first question that I asked, which is, is this a storm in a teacup, or is it more kind of systemic? So, Simeon, let me ask you first, just for a comment on that. Again, I'm changing order, but anyway.
Yeah, it's not a teacup. No, we're seeing this grow in size, grow in impact. And in fact, I mean, we're concerned that it might reach an inflection point where it has a significant non-recoverable position to the ecosystem. Short-term gain by so many small companies. And I think what's not being seen is the aggregate impact of this.
I think that's a great phrase, the aggregate impact. Jason.
Yeah, I agree that it's not storm in a teacup. It is going to be there forever. I think it'll be on the fraud framework. As I said earlier, NCSC are updating their guidance as well, so it'll be in their documents. Other trade bodies will do the same. It'll be there for the foreseeable future. Probably at a different scale, depending on market. I think the main thing I'd say, learn from those affected clients to help all your other clients, but on the back of that, we get them where fraudsters are pretending to log tickets, pretending they're real customers being adversely affected. They're not. They're testing the process. They're trying to get these number ranges unblocked, and it's kind of unbelievable the process they go through. So you have to think about your entire process, and just because someone says they're legitimate, you don't necessarily have to believe they're legitimate. That's a real concern for me. The fraudsters are getting very clever at that. And I think, finally, I would say, within the messaging ecosystem, please sign the code of conduct to show you're doing the right thing. Give yourself that badge of honor. And if you're an enterprise and you're listening to this, then please make sure you review the code of conduct and make sure it's a minimum standard for you. The UK government insists on this. And it made a big impact in the fact that all those organisations that were working with UK government in messaging had to make sure they adhere to this standard. If other organisations follow that and make that the minimum standard, again, this will help improve the whole ecosystem for all of our benefits.
Yeah, to Tim, my last 10 seconds, we've got to go then. But what I would say is SMS is potentially the first and last ever truly ubiquitous messaging channel. That is something we've got to guard and protect. And most importantly, and mobile operators need to realize this, it's carrier based. It brings them a really nice margins in particular. And particularly now with with the commercial model changes and increased functionality of WhatsApp business messaging in particular, there's an extra level of threat. So I totally agree with Simeon. We're fast reaching this inflection point where there is no return. Unfortunately.
So I've got away with it. It's James who overran, not me.
I know. Sorry. Susan is going to kill me now. 1 minute. I know I'm going to get it. I'm going to get a message soon.
I really appreciate all your inputs. Hopefully this has been useful to the audience in giving kind of a little bit of a balanced view. And I think, we'd be really interested by the next section, getting some of kind of the research figures. But I think the other thing that's really come out loud and clear here is that you can do something about it. It's not just a fact of life. You've just got to address it. And hey, and I love the fact we referred back to the postal system.
Old school.
That's what it used to cost. Thanks very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.